isn't an exaggeration to say these are the slowest couple weeks, maybe on the entire college football calendar. Most schools, players aren't even on campus. Finals are done. Guys are home for 2 or 3 weeks during the end of May. Many schools will have players report back this weekend. And so outside of the schools that are still kind of mining the portal for a player or two, or like 30 if you're Deion Sanders, outside of them, there's not really much going on. I actually saw Nick Saban was in Europe on vacation. That tells you how slow things are. But there is one place where there is still a lot of news, and most of it is not good. And that's the place where it should be all good news, all rainbows and sunshines. That is Athens, Georgia, where yet another Georgia football player was arrested earlier this week. Here's what you need to know about the latest arrest, and here is why it's important. The latest arrest for Georgia football, and we don't talk about every arrest that's ever happened in college football, but this one does feel significant, and let me explain why. It came on Tuesday afternoon. We found out about it on Tuesday night when a wide receiver, Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, was arrested for driving 90 in a 45 zone, charged with reckless driving and speeding the maximum limits. So he is arrested and charged, and it's just so dumb, swerving in and out of traffic, 90 miles an hour in the middle of the day, in the middle of a crowded area. He gets arrested, and he is now in trouble at Georgia. The question becomes, many of you are probably thinking, Torres, why do you care? It's a young guy. He was speeding. He was driving too fast. It happens in every city and every college town in America. When you were his age, you probably drove too fast sometimes. Heck, you probably drive too fast now. To which I would say, one thing about me, I always try to keep it real. I'm not perfect. I don't think I've ever gotten a speeding ticket that I can remember, but I certainly have driven over the speed limit, and I've certainly never been a perfect driver by any stretch of the imagination. And so if it was just about a random player on a random football team getting arrested for speeding and reckless driving, this wouldn't be a story that I talked about or that any other college football or sports podcast or radio show talked about at all. The problem is, this isn't the first driving-related arrest or driving-related incident over the last couple months at Georgia. As a matter of fact, it's not the second or third as well. For those of you who have not been following, this is now an epidemic, if you will, at the University of Georgia, as best I can count. This is the fourth different reckless driving incident involving Georgia football players, including some of their most high-profile players. For people who do not remember, probably the most notable one came on the day of the Georgia National Championship Parade in Athens. And I hate to bring it up. We've talked about it before. It's a tragic incident, but it was an incident involving a Georgia staffer named Chandler LaCroix. She was driving 4 people. She got in a crash that ultimately took her own life, as well as Devin Willock, who was a player on the Georgia football team. Awful story, tragic story. And unfortunately, as we found out later, and I'm not here to point fingers after the fact, but it was a largely avoidable story. Chandler LaCroix was driving 104 miles an hour. And as we later found out, there was alcohol in her system, according to the toxicology report. Doesn't make her a bad person. Doesn't make her a bad human. This isn't to tear down young people and all that stuff. This was a tragic incident where 2 people lost their lives. The problem is, as that story unfolded, we started to learn more stories about stuff going on with Georgia. One, keep this in mind. We found out later that Jalen Carter, who was projected as potentially the number 1 pick in the draft, but certainly a top 3, top 4 pick in the draft, was actually racing against Chandler LaCroix that night in Athens. He left the scene of the incident after the crime. He ended up coming back. Now, to his, I don't know if credit's the right word, but alcohol was not involved in his case. But he eventually got arrested for this. And remember, he was at the NFL Combine and had to leave the NFL Combine in Indianapolis to return to Athens to turn himself into police. On top of that, we found out after the fact that Jamon Dumas-Johnson, another team captain, was actually arrested there was an incident a few days before that incident where he was ultimately arrested. And then most recently, prior to the incident that I'm talking about on Tuesday, there was also a DUI and reckless driving incident involving a wide receiver named Denylon Morissette. And I should mention, by the way, there was another player, Ra Thomas, a transfer from Mississippi State, who was arrested. That had nothing to do with driving or speeding. You can look that one up itself. But even if you just look at the speeding, the driving, the reckless driving incidents involving Georgia football players, that is now this incident that just happened on Tuesday. It is now the fourth incident since mid-January involving Georgia football players. It is the second incident involving a team captain. 2 of the 4 have involved alcohol. And of course, one of them was a fatal crash that took 2 people's lives. So forgive me for those of you that, oh, Torres, he's just trying to make big something out of nothing over this Georgia incident because it's Georgia and it's the number 1 team in the country. No. The reason I'm talking about this is because it is the 4th driving incident. Again, 2nd involving alcohol, 2nd involving a team captain. Unfortunately, one of them was fatal. And so forgive me for talking about this, but I believe that there is an issue within the Georgia football program. And by the way, you know who else happens to agree with me? If you think that I'm overreacting, earlier this week, the Georgia school president came out with a statement basically condemning things, and the Georgia AD came out with a statement. Now, to this point, Kirby Smart has not commented on the last 2, but if you don't think there is a problem at Georgia, a problem that needs to be solved, a problem that is putting the citizens of that town and surrounding area at risk, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Now, to Kirby Smart's credit, I don't want to totally blame everything on him. These are adults. These are young men. We're going to talk about it in a minute with Deion Sanders talking about the responsibility that comes with being a young man on a college campus. So this isn't all on Kirby Smart. And to his credit, he has brought in people to try and explain the severity of what is going on. It's worth noting that at a press conference on March 14th, he was asked about this. Obviously, those were his first, I believe, public comments following the tragic incident involving the 2 people that died. And here is what Kirby Smart said about it. He said, "We brought in Athens, Clark County Police and UGA Police to address a lot of these issues with our team in a team meeting setting, and played some video of things that were going on in Atlanta, drag racing and things like that." And so I bring it up because Kirby Smart is clearly aware. Kirby Smart is very concerned, and Kirby Smart has brought in law enforcement to explain the severity of this incident, of all these incidents. So this isn't all on Kirby Smart. It's not to say he should be fired or he needs to be this or he needs to be that. That's not what I'm saying at all. But at the same time, the same thing keeps happening over and over and over again. What do we always say? The definition of insanity is the same thing happening over and over and expecting different results. And so to me, not enough is being done. And to me, a lot of this does fall on Kirby Smart. It sucks. You're a head football coach. You want to focus on football. But when you get paid $11 million a year, which is what Kirby Smart's salary is, fair or not, when stuff starts happening, not once, not twice, but 4 times in a short amount of time, you're going to be called to the mat and you are going to be held responsible. And it's not totally fair. And I understand he's a football coach, but you're responsible for the players you bring to campus. You're responsible for their actions when they are breaking the law. In a lot of ways, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the incident at Alabama, the second gun incident a few weeks ago. And we talked about it then. We all know the alleged incident that involved Brandon Miller a few months back at Alabama. And we talked about that extensively. And we talked about what should happen. And we talked about who should be blamed. But then a few weeks ago, as you remember, an Alabama recruit, a commit out of the portal named Jaquan Walton, was arrested with a gun on campus. Nate Oates wasn't there. The kid had never played. And to Nate Oates' credit, he said he immediately released a statement that said, this kid is not part of our program and we are not actively recruiting him. At the same time, though, what did I also say? I said Nate Oates has to be tougher. Nate Oates has to come down on his guys. When those guys return to campus this spring, he has to say there is a zero tolerance policy for guns in his program. And when it comes to Georgia, I don't know what the answer is, but Kirby Smart has to do more. Now, I can't say there should be a zero tolerance policy for speeding because A guy might get arrested for doing, 68 in a 65, but at the same time, something more has to be done. You go back to the punishment for all of these incidences. Jamin Dumas Johnson was handled internally. And to this point, Kirby Smart has not released any type of statement on Denylon Morissette's incident and what his punishment is, and obviously nothing on the most recent incident as well. And so to me, I don't know what the answer is, but whatever you're doing is not working. I don't know if it's a 1-game suspension, a 3-game suspension, a 6-game suspension. Maybe it's a case-by-case basis. I understand you can't compare a slight speeding situation to stuff that involves alcohol, this, that, the other thing. But again, when it's not 1, it's not 2, it's not 3, it's 4 different incidents in a 5-month span, and it involves some of your most high-profile players, something has to change. Clearly bringing in speakers and people from the community isn't enough. Clearly you trying to put your foot down and handle things internally isn't enough. And I'll tell you what, if I was Kirby Smart, when my players report back to campus this summer, this is the number 1 conversation. Not sure how much you could even spend time with them this time of year, but hey, we have no tolerance for this. If this happens, you're either off the team, you're not playing week 1, you might not be playing week 2, because something has to change.